How'd you like to listen to .NET Rocks with no ads? Easy. Become a patron. For just $5 a month, you get access to a private RSS feed where all the shows have no ads. $20 a month will get you that and a special .NET Rocks patron mug. Sign up now at patreon.netrocks.com.
Hey, Carl and Richard here. As you may have heard, NDC is back offering their incredible in-person conferences around the world, and we'd like to tell you about them.
NDC Oslo will be May 21st through the 25th. Go to ndcoslo.com to register.
NDC Copenhagen is happening August 27th through the 31st. Go to ndccopenhagen.com for more information.
NDC Porto is happening October 16th through the 20th. The early bird discount for NDC Porto ends July 21st. Go to ndcporto.com to register.
And check out the full lineup of conferences at ndcconferences.com. Welcome back to .NET Rocks. This is Carl Franklin.
And this is Richard Campbell.
And we are in our respective home offices, although it doesn't sound like it, does it?
Oh.
It sounds like we're like together in a studio that costs millions of dollars.
Yeah, we fool people all the time with that.
Can you remember when we used to use the phone line to synchronize our audio files?
The Telos 1+1? Oh, yes.
The Telos?
Yeah.
Yeah, if we went through like a laundry list of all the gear that we've had to use throughout the years and how it's evolved.
Thousands of dollars worth of gear, too. Those Teloses were not cheap.
Yeah, you want to buy one?
No thanks. No.
All right.
Last one I had cooked off and went to the e-waste recycler.
How is Vancouver this time of year, Richard?
Frozen. It's like -6.
A couple of weeks ago, it was like 50 degrees Fahrenheit here.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next week, it was like 10 below.
Right.
What the hell? And California froze too.
Froze, yeah. Yeah, we call that climate instability.
Oh, it's terrible. Well, anyway, it was terrible for you. Okay for me. But, man, I just
fine.
wish it would be over. Yeah.
Before this show comes out, I will have jetted off to New Zealand for a few days.
Well, ain't you lucky?
I am officiating a wedding again.
Richard had a little lamb, a little ham, a little spam. All right, let's get it going with Better Know Framework. All
right, man, what do you got?
This came across my desk, such as it is, from somebody, I think it was on Mastodon. Mm-hmm. And it's called CodeMade. CodeMade.net. Doing our developer dirty work.
What?
An open source Visual Studio extension to clean up and simplify C#, C++, F#, VB, PHP, PowerShell, R, JSON, XAML, XML, ASP, HTML, CSS, LESS, SCSS, JavaScript, and TypeScript coding.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I have a few customers that need this badly.
Interesting.
Let's just say that.
I mean, how does a tool clean up code without damaging it?
Oh, removing unused using statements, sorting them, adding unspecified access modifiers, removing empty regions, adding blank line padding, removing blank lines next to braces, just like formatting, you know?
Okay.
I mean, when Control-E, Control-D doesn't do the trick, for some reason, this kind of thing works. And there's been, tools like this throughout the ages, but this is kind of the state of the art. So I'm told. I don't particularly think my code needs it, but somebody did. That's why they shared it with me. So.
Somebody thought your code needed it? Okay.
Yeah. It's kind of like when your friend gives you some deodorant as a gift.
Yeah. Or, hands you the pack of Tic Tacs unprompted. Here.
No, I don't want those. Yes,
take as many as you want. Please.
All right, my friend, that's what I got. Who's talking to us?
I love it. Grabbed a comment off of show 1761, the one we did with Mads back in the fall of 2021, talking about C#10. That was right within weeks of the...
And 2021 really did fall, didn't it?
Well, there was a fall. It was cold.
Yeah. Okay.
And this comment comes from Maurice Peters, and he says, I just wanted to respond to the remark from Mads. It's great to hear the C# team is listening to the community, and they take the time to design a feature like discriminating unions by trying to find out what it is the community actually means when they say they want discriminating unions. And I remember this conversation, right? And we were talking about exactly that. So what do you mean when you say that? Mads adds to this remark, and I am paraphrasing, perhaps crudely, that when the community wants to have an F-sharp-like discriminating union, they should probably use F-sharp.
Yep.
Dun, dun, dun.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I understand his remark, and I would love to use F-sharp in my day job as well. However, it is often not feasible to switch to a different programming language. There are lots of reasons for this, one of them being that it's hard to attract a large number of developers with knowledge of F-sharp or any other functional language for that matter. And C-sharp is a very enjoyable language to work in, so don't forget that part. I totally agree with you. And I think we said as much on the show.
Yeah, and I think we also suggested that if possible, you can create a class library in F-sharp just to do the F-sharpy things.
Yeah, it's still...
And then use that in C-sharp.
Your employer kind of needs to know you did that, right? Like somebody does have to maintain that. It can't be only you.
And a feature like discriminating unions kind of is a fundamental thing. So it's going to be in everything.
And so Maurice wraps up by saying features usually associated with functional languages like discriminating unions have a lot of value. For instance, designing type-driven domain models. And he plugs Scott Waslin's book, Domain Modeling Made Functional here. The earlier in the development cycle we were able to catch errors in domain model, the cheaper it is to fix them. So I guess that means as early as possible in the inner development loop. If you ask me specifically what you would like to achieve with functional programming paradigms like in C# in general, and I like to think I'm not the only one, would like them to expand my options to explicitly include a domain model by exploiting the type system and the compiler. Thanks for a great show.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Maurice. Good thoughts, and I'm sure Mads will contribute to them when we let him speak, because currently he's tied up in a closet. And a copy of Music to Code By is on its way to you. And if you'd like a copy of Music to Code By, write a comment on the website at .netrocks.com or on the Facebooks, where you read every comment. And if I read it on the show, we'll send you a copy of Music to Code By.
And definitely follow us on Mastodon. I'm at Carl Franklin at techhub.social.
I'm Rich Campbell at mastodon.social.
Send us a toot.
I don't know. The Mastodon thing just doesn't seem to be gaining any momentum.
Maybe in your world not, but I find better engagement on Mastodon with my 1% of my followers.
Sure.
That I have on Twitter. I find they're more attentive and more interested in what I have to say.
And I think Twitter is not as big a dumpster fire as we expected. Honestly, when you saw the layoffs, I've done enough large scale infrastructure stuff to think if he really got rid of all those guys, he's got a week. But apparently he didn't. The system has stayed up. Obviously, there's funny things happening, like getting rid of
free SMS 2FA. Yeah, that's a great idea.
It turns out it wasn't free, that there are questionable telcos in the world that were running bots that would create accounts on Twitter, set up MFA just to collect a few cents that they would get for every text message.
Interesting. Well, you can always use an authenticator too, and that's what you should use.
And arguably should.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think they would have had a better PR statement if just said, hey, we're getting rid of SMS for authentication. Use a real authenticator. Rather than say, hey, you could pay us.
But if you want to send us a tweet, I'm at Carl Franklin. He's at Rich Campbell.
Yes, we are.
All right, let's bring on Mads. That's who you're here for. Mads Torgersen is the program manager for the C# language at Microsoft and runs the C# design meetings. Prior to joining Microsoft in 2005, he was an associate professor at the University of Aarhus. Is that right? Aarhus?
Yeah, that's close enough.
Doing programming language research. Welcome back. Can't wait to hear what you had to say, sir.
Thank you. It's great to be back. I feel like I've been here so many times. This must be like my second or third time or something like that.
Something like that. I should probably count them up. There's probably a few more that I was in Sweden not long ago, and the conversation came up about just how many language designers come from Denmark. It's kind of staggering.
Yeah.
This is your 6th show, by the way. 6th.
Sixth. Yeah, there you go. More than any other language designer, more than any other Danish language designer. It comes up a lot, and I don't know what it is. There was a whole lot of interest in programming languages and compilers all the way back in the 60s,
right.
We built algol compilers in Denmark. Someone like Charles Simoni worked in Denmark for a while working on an algol compiler.
Might be the herring and sour cream, don't you think? Maybe? Or is that not a Danish thing?
I mean, we have both.
Yeah.
I gotta wonder if it was just certain professors, and I wouldn't know their names, that cultivated an environment where it just sort of became known as a place where you work on programming languages. And so the folks that wanted to do that tended to go there. It was the best place to do it in.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to that. I mean, object-oriented programming famously was invented not in Denmark, but in Scandinavia, in Norway. One of the two inventors spent a lot of time in Denmark, in Aarhus. And I bumped into him many times while I was there. So there's been a culture for longer than I've been alive. I don't know if it's still going, actually. I don't have that much of a connection anymore. It's been 17 years plus since I was there full time. But there definitely was sort of like an environment in academic circles in particular.
Yeah. So you're not a good alumni of the university. You're not staying in touch, making regular visits. I would imagine they'd love to have you do a presentation or two there.
Oh, I've been back a few times. Yeah. It's not that I completely lost touch. But yeah, it's probably half a decade between each visit.
Well, we have had a 2.5 year interruption on just about everything. So.
Right.
It was that too, yeah.
But it doesn't sound like you guys have stopped at all. C# 11, well along in development. I see preview 1 of the framework dropped. I think there was language stuff in there as well.
That's actually 12, C# 12.
C# 12 we're talking about.
Well, see, I told you 2021 fell.
Yeah.
Yeah. There isn't any language stuff in the first preview, at least as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
That'll start in preview 2. I think we'll see, I'm betting we'll see primary constructors, and maybe a few other things there, and then things will start seeping in.
Okay. What's a primary constructor?
Oh, Carl Weitz.
I'll buy.
Well, it's sort of a generalizing, a thing that we already did with records. For a record in C#, you can put, constructor parameters directly on the class name, on the type name when you declare one. And you can also pass along base constructor arguments on the base class of a record, class. But it was sort of limited to records. And in records, it's very it does a lot of things when you do that. It generates public properties for each of the parameters and so on. It's sort of like it's sort of like a way to try to mimic, functional records a little bit, a very terse way of describing your data model, in one fell swoop. And that's a little much for other classes because, records are specifically when you want to describe very straight up data, with a clear structure and public properties and so on. But it can still be very useful to allow you to specify a main constructor where the parameters are on the class itself, so that instead of doing the work of stashing the incoming data somewhere in private fields or protected fields or whatever, they're just in scope.
They're just there.
Just capture them, just like a Lambda can capture things from around it. And so there is a more limited form of primary constructors coming out on ordinary classes and structs. And we've tinkered a lot with exact semantics and everything, but we think it's there now. We think it has a really good, first design. There are some optional things we could do to it that we haven't done yet. And we'll probably do the usual thing now that we're shipping every year and just, ship the basic version and see what people clamor for, There are kinds of ideas for, hey, you could do this, that TypeScript does, or you could do that F# does, or you could do this third thing that no one does, and we're just yeah, but here, we know this part is good, so let's ship that, and then let's see what you all say.
The annual cadences, that must be really empowering, because it's only a year.
It's incredible.
And there'll be interim releases.
Yeah, no, it's incredible, and the more we've sort of leaned into it, the more we've gotten used to it, the more we use it. We have many feature sets that we drip out year after year, because then we can take much more fine-grained, quote unquote, advice from the community, from users, not just the people who engage before the original feature comes out, but the people who are on the forefront enough that they use new features and tell us when they think something is missing and give us their scenarios and so on.
But they're also self-selecting. You used to do this back in the before open source days, but it was software design reviews. Like you had to get an invitation to come in and sit with the team and they'd show off the features. And it was a kind of a prestige-y sort of thing. Like you had to spend a lot of time to get your foot in the door of an SDR in the first place. Now it's like, if you can get to GitHub and you care, you can participate. Yeah.
And it's important for us to have these different kind of circles of engagement, right? Obviously we've had this program called the MVP program for a long time. And we had that was even around when I joined, these many years ago. And that was a way to have a certain group of people that you could share your secrets with and get early design advice. And then, yes, there were the design reviews and so on. But it's almost like guaranteed that will not be a representative set of people, no, right? If you're selected from that, for that kind of thing, then you are special in some way. I remember Steven Sinofsky gave me the best demonstration I'd ever seen of this to the RDs when they were talking about IE9, which was not out yet. So that'll set you the time frame for it. He says to the room, there must be 150 of us. How many of you here use bookmarks in IE? Right. The entire room puts up its hand. Yeah. Says, would you like to see the docs or Watson data for bookmark usage? It's 2%.
Right. You're talking to the people that use the product more than anybody else.
That's right.
And in a much different way. And I also appreciate that, you have the really two groups of people who are, who don't want to maybe change everything to use the new language features because they're maintaining old code, and that would, it's a cultural disruption. It's not a backward compatibility issue. It's a cultural disruption, right? And then you have the people like me who are just on the forefront doing research every day and saying, whoa, that's really cool. Let me show everybody how that works. So yeah, there's a big difference between those groups.
It's definitely a span, and we want to have more circles of influence, so to speak, and we can now that we're so open, and now that we're shipping so frequently, right? So we get people on GitHub helping us with the things we haven't finished yet, and we have people who are adopting new features as they come out, give us feedback in time for us to choose the right next steps for a given feature that's already shipped.
I appreciate that it feels like you guys work on a given feature until you say, okay, that now has value. Let's stop, get that out in the field and see how they use it before we go any further.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, it's not enough to achieve minimum value necessarily. We'll go until we feel like, we'll do the things that we feel certain are useful.
Or is it you get to a point, the fork in the road, where it's like, there's now 3 ways to go. It's hard to tell which one's better. Maybe this is the best place to start.
Yeah, it's often that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just time, because a year isn't that long. And so we're like, this is as far as we got, but this is a coherent feature in and of itself. So we'll ship that.
Cause I'm sure there's features that don't get put into the product that were worked on in that year. It's like, this is not there yet. It's going to slip a cycle. We'll work on it later.
Absolutely. And that was one of the harder things actually with switching to a yearly cadence, is to make sure you keep doing things that take longer than a year.
Yeah, right.
Right. You get hooked on that. I got to deliver this every year. Yeah. You're making smaller things rather than bigger things.
Right.
Yeah. It has to be fine to work on something that is not about to ship.
Interesting. Okay. It has to be like, is that more of a good for the career or good for the product? Like that's the interesting balance. Like if nothing made it in the latest release, that would be a problem also.
That's true. Yes. So, but there's definitely a balance there where you want, and I think it comes sort of on its own. If you look for the right mix of features in general, some of them will be small, some, quality of life features, or medium that we can relatively quickly take from idea to product, but then we also just have to keep those strategic lines in mind of, we really want to grow the language on this front. And, we might spend several years before people see the first sort of down payment on a given feature direction.
Also, I imagine you got groups of people, like you have the ADHD people working on this year's features, and you have like the old timer, long term people who just want to work on code every day, working on those things that are going to come out in a couple of years.
that might be how it pans out. I don't know about who has ADHD and who doesn't. I know I do, but I still do work on the long-term features.
Yeah. But it's a personality trait too, folks who are great at knocking out quick things and folks that enjoy a long duration. We work on the same thing every day.
Yeah.
That is true to some degree. I think that we generally have a culture of also not of letting people span these different kinds of
right. Don't
work.
Pigeonhole them either.
Yeah.
Like you only do short stuff.
Yeah. Don't actively pigeonhole people for sure.
Yeah.
Like everybody should have room to grow in a direction they're not strong in. And I think that works out pretty well. So it's not so much that, this feels like a Bob feature and this feels like a Katie feature. That's not how it works.
No.
No.
Do people volunteer for features? Like, how does this happen? Stuff comes in on GitHub, conversations go on. I see you generally in them, as the sort of shepherd of the language, but how does that happen?
Well, so, there's there's the language design team and then there's the compiler team, and other teams that also do some work, language related work. So first there's the language design team, and that is sort of, that's the thing I lead. I'm the only dictatorial power I like to exercise is that I get to decide who's on that team.
Right.
So that's a virtual team of people from different parts. They all work at Microsoft. It's not like a community forum. It's 100% Microsoft employees, but they're plucked from various parts of the product and from various disciplines and backgrounds. And generally the idea is people who are passionate about C#, who have great ideas and who are collaborative and who collectively represent a bunch of different viewpoints.
Right. So you want folks from the compiler team there, and you want folks that focus on the frameworks there, like that have all those different views, but also have a passion for the language.
Yeah. That essentially have enough passion for the language that they want to invest essentially extracurricular time, in making C# good and working actively on its future. So that's where things go first. Essentially, because there's so much coming in on the, I don't think anyone reads everything that comes in on GitHub.
It's unbelievable, right?
It's vast, right? So we have a system, a championing system that we've essentially stolen from academia from academic conferences, that for a feature to make it to discussion in the design team, someone on the design team needs to have championed it. Say, like, I want to discuss this. That gets it on the agenda. Then we triage it, so to speak, see if we have a feeling that it has legs and there's a path forward. There are many good features that fall at this stage because we just like that would be great, but A, we don't know how to do it, or B, while it would be great, there are these many things that are greater. So I'll have to wait. So that it can be frustrating if you're out there trying to, get our attention, but it's just, we need some kind of filtering mechanism, and this kind of, everybody can scour and then champion if there's something there that they think we should discuss. And it's not necessarily that we want that feature. It's that it warrants discussion. Like, I've championed several features that I probably, at the end of the day, at least initially didn't feel like was the right thing, but it was bringing up a good discussion that we should have, I felt.
Right. I mean, it's just as powerful to have conversations about what the language shouldn't do as what the language should do.
Yeah.
Right. It does help put parameters around things. I had to go look at the Roslyn repository, and it's like 50 minutes ago, another issue opened, and it's 67,038. There's 8,000 open and 22,000 closed. It's like, this is a lot of stuff, Mads. Holy man.
Yeah.
Well, the Roslyn repo is where the compiler is built. And so we started out having our language design go on in the same repo. But we branched it out fairly early on because so we have our own repo for the language design part, C# lang.
Right.
Which doesn't have code in it as like the source in there is all documents, right? So we separated out the language design work stream. It was too kind of semi-separate audiences, and it was a mess to kind of have it all together. So
When did you separate it out?
it's a long time ago.
Must have been a few years. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's at least 5 years ago, I would say. It was pretty early on. Like we were on, what's it called? Codeplex for a bit.
Yep.
Then we
Back
co-inhabited the Roslyn repo for a year or two. I don't think it was longer than that.
Okay. So that's 2014, 2015. Within a couple of years, you felt like you need to peel it off. I don't disagree at all. And it's interesting to see, I'm looking at them side by side, C#Lang and Roslyn, and the difference in the conversation. The kinds of topics that show up with C#Lang are different.
Yeah. And it's kind of like you want to be able to talk about language without talking about compilers, because most people who have something interesting to say about languages don't necessarily know or shouldn't know how a compiler works, right? Because part of doing language design, of course, is this feasible to build? And, could this ever be efficient? That kind of thing. So some of us on the design team do need to have compiler background.
Right. But that shouldn't be the only thing. Yeah,
right. It shouldn't be a thing that makes the language design discussion less welcoming. It shouldn't be sort of a corner of a compiler place. So this works really well. It means that people can come in with much more of a user perspective on the thing.
Yeah, and just a pure language perspective. Like, I suspect some big ideas come out of here that turn into, this would be really hard to do, but does it show enough value that it might be worth taking it on? Where as soon as you get to, boy, that's going to be tough on the compiler, a lot of stuff's going to sink. Yeah.
And you don't want a bunch of people saying no. You want, at least you want to balance it with another bunch of people saying, but wait.
Yeah.
So, having breadth there, both in the community and on the design team, is really very, very useful. Nobody can kind of see all the perspectives at once. So diversity just really is extremely useful. It spans out like this vast space of opportunity.
Well, this feels like a good time to take a break because I want to dive into some of the new features, but let's do that when we come back. We'll be right back after this message. Amazon AWS is a great home for your .NET applications. Whether you're looking to run your apps as serverless functions, have them run in containers, or you require the complete flexibility of virtualized hardware, you can do it all on AWS. .NET toolkits and templates guide you through build and deployment, or you can use your favorite infrastructure as code and CI/CD tools, including Azure DevOps, GitHub Actions, and GitLab CI/CD. Loving Visual Studio, VS Code, or Rider? There's an AWS toolkit for each of them. Want to use familiar Microsoft SQL Server databases? You can with the Amazon Relational Database Service, which provides fully managed SQL Server databases that offer automatic scaling, failover, and snapshots. Once your .NET application is deployed, it can use any of the over 200 AWS services to extend its functionality. Interested in AI, IoT, machine learning, video processing, or transcription? Your .NET on AWS application can do it all. To learn more, go to aws.amazon.com/net.
There is always something new from our sponsor, Text Control. As a developer, do you need to integrate PDF generation, document editing, or electronic signatures into your ASP.NET Core or Angular applications? Or you want to learn more about the differences between electronic and digital signatures? Text Control is offering a free consulting service to educate you about digital document processing and how Text Control products can help you add these features to your applications. Go to textcontrol.com/contact and request your free personal consultation.
And we're back. This is Carl Franklin. You're listening to .NET Rocks. That's Richard Campbell.
Hey.
That's Mads Torgersen, the Mads scientist on the C# team. And we've been talking about sort of the culture around how Microsoft, decides what comes in, what goes out. And let's talk about some new features. It looks like there's a lot of really cool small features, default parameters and lambdas and things like that. But maybe we can talk about some of the bigger things that, that people may not know about.
Yeah, I mean, we shipped C#11 in November of 2022, and that's when we ship every year. And there were some very big things in there and some medium big things. A huge thing that is an example of a multi-year effort that culminated in this release is the language part of it is static virtual members in interfaces. So that sounds a little gnarly, but it has several potential use cases that essentially are new abstractive power, if you will, in C#. But the one that we really doubled down on as a use case for it, the one that kind of drove it home that we are supporting in the framework is generic math. So the ability to have mathy code with operators and so on be abstracted over the type that it's working on. So from a language point of view, the feature is that an interface can now have the virtual interface members can now be static, right? You can say a class that implements this interface must have this static member, must have, for instance, it must have a plus operator.
Okay.
Or it must have this static property, 0. So you can imagine now interfaces dictating the shape, not just of the instances of the classes that implement them, but also the classes themselves.
Interesting.
And that's sort of the key new abstractive power, if you will. And it has a number of really cool use cases. One of them, of course, is what I mentioned. Like you can now abstract over math, and we built a whole set of interfaces that represent different math capabilities, essentially different sets of operators and stuff. And we implemented those interfaces on all our own mathy types, and now people can plug into those interfaces as well with their own mathy types. Just imagine doing abstract composition. Like you have a matrix type, and you can say matrix of T, where T is the element type of the matrix. And now you can require that T implements the interfaces that represent the math operations you need in order to implement the math operations on the matrix. Like if you want to do matrix multiplication, for instance, well, the elements need to be able to be added and multiplied. And if you want to build an identity matrix, you need to have some representation of zeros and ones, right? And so on. And you can now abstract over all of that. You can say matrix of T where T has these capabilities.
And the interface actually looks like it's implementing the math, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is weird. So, that's not an interface. That's a base class. That's what my brain is telling me. I'm fighting against it.
The interface isn't implementing the math. It is just specifying the math, right? And then types that implement the interface will implement the math. So the interface is not playing a different role than it does. It's still just like a contract, right? But
okay, I see. I'm looking at the docs, and I was looking at the implementation, not the interface. The interface, public static of T, like midpoint is the thing that returns the midpoint of two double numbers. But the interface doesn't actually do it. Yeah.
Right.
It's very cool.
I mean, you can have default implementations of these things, just like you can of other things nowadays. But the main thing is that you can specify a contract that is about these static members.
Yeah.
But there are other uses for that as well. And one of the coolest, I think, is abstract static factories, right? There's these two design patterns. You have static factories, which have up until now been static methods that produce instances of the class they're on, or a subclass, or whatever they abstract over constructors in a way. They're like the details about how this object is constructed. But that can't vary down a type hierarchy, right? It's a method that's non-virtual. Or you can have abstract factories, which do vary by the type of the thing they produce, but you kind of have to have a parallel hierarchy of factories that implement the abstract factories for some other type hierarchy, which is like a pretty gnarly pattern to do. With this, you can just smoosh them together. You can say everything that implements this interface has a factory that takes these specific elements and produces itself.
Wow.
Produces that type, that implement, right?
Yeah.
So an example, for instance, is think about an iParsable. We actually have added such an interface. There's an iParsable as a new interface in there. iParsable of T. That has a static method parse, a try parse, that takes a string and returns a fresh instance of the type the interface is implemented on, of T.
Yeah.
Right? And so all of a sudden you can say, you can get the symmetry between the, if you think serialize and deserialize, right? Serialize is an instance method on an object of a given type. Deserialize now can be a static method that is implemented to the specific, type that it's working on, but abstracted up in the same interface. So
Interesting.
some beautiful things come out of that. And I can't wait to see what else people do with this. Cause this is sort of like, it's very rare that we add this kind of new abstractive power to the language, to the very core of the language. Like it's in the runtime and everything. It's like, this is new expressiveness. This isn't just syntactic sugar or, it's genuine new expressiveness. And it's fun to do that kind of feature.
Yeah,
it's fun to see it, to see what people do with it.
How much energy do you put into looking at what people are doing with it? Like, I don't know how you'd go about that, but is it surveys or something just to see, people experimenting with this new feature?
Well, we probably don't have enough of systematic looking for it. We sort of say, if you do something fun with it, please tell us.
Right.
And then, and we have enough kind of interaction with customers in various, in various fora that we do get some examples of things. But honestly, we probably don't do enough of kind of once the feature's in and it's too late. It might still be good to do more to see, is it actually being used the way we thought or at all?
Right. Well, and is there syntactic sugar you could have after the fact in later versions to make it easier to use too? I mean, we've had this conversation before, but we've had abstract data factories for a long time, and there are hard ways to implement it. Like you said, gnarly code.
Yeah.
If you like that pattern, we've had approaches to serialization, deserialization that exist. Like, to me, it always seems like the hardest thing about C#11 is all the C#6 out there.
That is true. There's certainly we already have these patterns, so too bad for us,
Yeah.
That's often a thing that we have to think about for a language feature. If it fundamentally changes something that everybody already does in a certain way, including our own core libraries, well, it might not be worth doing, even if you can be like, oh, I wish we had done this from the start. The whole world would be better.
I can't imagine how many times you say that.
Right. Maybe you can't get from here to there in any, now you'll just have the old way and the new way coexisting forever.
Yes.
Which is actually a very, an interesting, you read that comment in the beginning about discriminated unions.
Yes.
That's exactly like one of those challenges where, well, they better fit in really well with what's already there. It can't be just this new way of doing things because then how will it work with everything that's already there?
Sure.
Right? So you have to think about those things.
Yeah, because discriminated union, I mean, it's coming from F#. It's about function passing. Like architecturally, it's a different thing. So it's not going to work well in C#. You don't want to make C# into F#.
Right. I mean, there are versions of discriminated unions that can work well in C#, I think. But I think by and large, they are ones that are very closely integrated with the data modeling capabilities we already have. They're sort of like records to classes is like records are not a new thing. They're a completely new kind of thing. They're a variant of classes that can be treated as, in most ways, just treated as classes, but they just do some extra things for you. And if you can have that kind of relationship, then it becomes less of a whole new, sub language and more of, a fine-grained choice. Like here, I want to do this particular little hierarchy as a discriminated union because that would give me these certain benefits. It becomes that kind of thing. It's much more fine-grained and much more local than, everything should have been discriminated unions instead of type.
Yeah, shoulda, woulda, coulda make you crazy. Like you can't do anything about that.
Right.
The install base is the install base. And how often do you ever introduce breaking changes in the language these days? I can't think of anything.
Well, we very much don't want to.
Yeah.
It's funny you should bring it up because we are starting to have a little bit of an itch there. So we definitely don't want to ever like remove a feature from C# or something like that. Even the ones we hate the most.
I'm sure there's a list of ones you'd love to remove, except for all the loud screaming that would occur afterwards.
Yeah. Well, you'd just be breaking a bunch of code that works just fine today.
Yeah. How to make people angry in one easy step.
So I actually don't believe that. Well, the size of the language is a bit of a problem. Like we grow it, but we never shrink it.
Yes.
But I don't think the solution to that is to start removing things from the language. We are working towards, Bill Wagner recently started a project in the docs, repo that is starting to kind of very gently point out what are probably what we call everyday C#.
Right.
All else equal, given that you're starting a new project and you don't have like a certain code base or culture that you need to abide by, what are the ways that you should probably do things nowadays?
Right.
So it's kind of like a very soft, boundary around.
You're not going to say best practices because that's rude.
Yeah.
You're really going to say, hey, here's a set of approaches that really take advantage of what the current compiler can do for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we add new features because we think they do things better than before, right? That's the whole point. So, and we need to have some sort of counterweight to the just the sheer weight of old advice that's out there now.
Yeah.
And to say nowadays, well, you can actually do this instead. So that I think we're trying to create a much softer, counterbalance to that you can go and see, well, okay, I'm open-minded. I want to try using C# the best it can nowadays in my next project, or my team wants to do that. Well, this is a good place to start.
And I love that it's Bill doing that because he is everybody's granddad. He does have a knack for putting his arm around your shoulder, metaphorically and saying it's going to be okay. Yeah. Let's go take a walk and we'll figure this out.
That's exactly right. Yeah. He has a lot of compassion for developers, like regardless of how leaning into new features they are and whatnot. And he's a really good person to drive striking that balance. But there is one other problem with the backcompat, and that is that occasionally it is when we add a new feature, it is limited in very annoying ways because of some, old code could accidentally, occasionally or whatever, like already look like this,
Right.
So we want to introduce a new, keyword in a certain context or whatever. Well, there could be a variable with that name or a type with that name somewhere. And we have to bend over backwards to accommodate those old cases, even if they're relatively rare and so on. And it does make the language more gnarly. And people know, people know of var, right? var, when we introduced var, in order not to break people, we had to take into account the fact that somebody could have a type called var with lowercase v, right? Oh, wow. And so the language is more gnarly than it would have to be. We could just have said, well, sorry, this is a keyword, or in a type position, this is a keyword. We would have broken a few people, but not very many. Instead, what we have is this awkward rule that if you declare something called var in scope, then the feature var is put out of, like, it's just turned off, right?
Oh, interesting.
And that actually sucks for everyone, except there are a few people who don't like var who actually declare a type called var and just so that they can,
that reminds
just to bump the compiler out.
They can force other people on the team not to use
if
var.
You have a variable named var, I look on you with the same disdain that I looked on basic programmers that had $$ and $B for variable names. var. Yeah. Oh boy, that's great.
And I think the best example in recent years is discards. I mean, you can go almost everywhere. You can use a discard to mean like a throwaway variable that I assign to when I don't care about the result. And and that I can pass as an out parameter when I don't care about the result and that kind of stuff, right? It's just a variable without a name that you can never get back to. Except that underscore is already a valid variable name. And so that in some places, underscore is a variable, and in some places it's a discard, depending on whether it could have meaning before this feature was introduced. And that is just nuts, man.
And again, it's like, what are you doing naming something underscore? Like, stop it.
Well, actually, a bunch of people did, because they were simulating. They were using that to signal that they wanted a...
It was a discard.
So most of the people who do actually probably would be fine breaking that and just using a real discard. But there are a few that use it for other things, for whatever reasons, you know?
Yeah.
It was there. It was available.
Can you tell me why somebody would use discard? I mean, discard, first of all, is like when you say underscore equals and then some function that returns something that you don't care about, but you could still call that function that returns something without having a return value. Why do you need that discard in that case?
Well, there functions you can call a function as a statement. It's not everything you can do as a statement. So essentially, if you want to do something, that can't be a statement. So an express, like you want to add two things just to see if your conversions work out right or whatever. I don't know what. There are a bunch of things that aren't allowed as statements in C#. But there are things that require a variable. For instance, so a couple of good examples are out parameters.
Sure, yeah, okay.
Where you're just like, I don't care about this one. I do care about that one. So now you can pass a discard for one of them, and you can actually declare a variable in place with an out vars inside C#7 or whenever that was. Also deconstruction. This thing returns a tuple of 4 things. I care about the 3, but the 4th I don't care about. Why do I have to declare a dummy variable and call it dummy variable just to receive that 4th thing? Why don't I just put an underscore and say don't care?
Okay.
Right. And make it clear to anybody reading it, I don't care about this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, maybe that's it, Richard. It's more readable.
It's legibility.
It's a strong and very brief signal that, don't care about this.
Don't care about it.
And it's a wonderful feature. And the only thing not wonderful about it, and I think I don't have evidence for this, but I'm sure that it has harmed its adoption to some degree, is that it's so gnarly that and occasionally it's not a discard. When you see an underscore, it's not a discard. And that is just navigating those rules for developers just silly.
Yeah. It's like the English language, all these exceptions to obvious rules.
Yeah. And so all this to say, that is something where I think we have an active discussion now, and we'll probably get it out on GitHub.
Introduce it as a breaking change.
When I get something down that we can have sort of like a very light breaking change in those situations, like enough to push existing features over in a few scenarios, so that we don't have to do a stupid design of the new one for the sake of everyone's future.
Yeah. It's gotta hurt to introduce a new feature damaged by the past.
Especially if it's a past that isn't that important. That's a simple, so if there's a simple little fix, that even we could automate, like we do a new feature, it'll break a few things. That's a simple fix that we can just, if you're in an IDE, we can just say, hey, this is going to be broken. Just want to fix all of them. Say if there's a field somewhere called underscore, do you want to say this dot underscore instead? Or do you want to rename this to underscore one?
Rename Kirk out.
Yeah.
This gets into that conversation about the tooling helping the language.
Yeah, that's true.
But at the same time, you can't really assume that everybody's using a rich IDE like Visual Studio.
Yeah. No, that's completely correct.
Ugh.
So
be lost without it.
We have to be there, and that's the devil is really in what is an acceptable experience? Like what is an acceptable level of break? Has to be small, has to be really well justified. And B, what is an acceptable experience when we do it? And this may all very well come to nothing because there is no good sweet spot there. We're just starting to poke at it, and we'll try to write up some things and put out in the community. It might already be out by the time this publishes, and or they may not. But try to get more community input on what is an acceptable experience here that doesn't boil the ocean for this in some other way.
No, I appreciate that. You and I have talked a number of times, both online and offline, about the whole, how do we get folks using the new features? Like the side effect of 20 plus years of development of a language is all that stuff. And people, I joke about people coding like it's 2005, but I'm sure there are folks that are doing that. And you said many times, like, it's the tooling. We see these large language models showing up everywhere. Do you look at leaning on that kind of technology to help people, write more modern C#?
That's an interesting kind of cross-discipline question there.
Yeah. And you're not the Visual Studio guy, but Visual Studio 17.5 in 2022, 17.5, you could see some of this stuff starting to appear. Yep. And I immediately think, are you going to help me write better C#? Because I'd like that. My C# not that good.
I'd still like to ask for it, though.
Yeah. I think there's, yes, the answer is yes. And you're already seeing it. And you see things like Copilot and IntelliCode and so on. Like, you're already seeing AI-based things creep in, and they're very localized. But you could definitely, you will see this keep growing. And
does it impact the language creation to think about the tooling?
Yes, to some degree. But more in a more traditional way. Like that has nothing to do with AI per se, but it impacts us. We've certainly, for many years, focused on being able to create a good IDE experience. Not so much able to in a, can we implement it kind of sense, but does it flow naturally? Like,
right.
All the way back to query expressions in LINQ.
Yeah.
Which, if you think about it, they're based on SQL queries for their structure, right? But in SQL, you say select from where. And in C# you say, from where select.
Yeah.
So the order of that is, the change in order is so that you're introducing your variables first.
Right.
So that the subsequent parts of the query can use, IntelliSense. So if you're in a type ahead mode, the things that you're projecting out at the end, actually are at the end by the time that you've established what they are and what they look like. So that was clearly driven by having a tooling perspective. Yeah. So the order of things in syntax.
Well, you talk about regrets for language designers. I bet the SQL folks loathe the fact that they put select ahead of from, because it's so apparent now. It's like, define the sources of data, then what you request.
I personally think it makes more sense.
Well, it reads more like English.
Yeah. And it also is from very general to very specific, right? Which is what compilers like.
Yeah.
One question that I have, I've come across in my travels a desire to serialize LINQ expressions, not the implementation, so to speak, but just like a LINQ expression, like we were just talking about, from X and this and select and all that. It would be very cool to turn that into some JSON, send it over the wire, and then allow an API, let's say, to execute it. What do you think about that?
I think there's several instances of it out there.
None of them
already
work.
That's probably true. That's not my fault, though.
No, I know that.
Well, the thing is, if you take a LINQ query and you start with a data source that is iQueryable rather than IEnumerable, right. That is, in other words, that is expression tree based. Well, then the query does in fact become a data structure, right? The query itself is a data structure. So that means that you can find a way to serialize that. Now, there's still, if the query is all written out in text, well, every single part of the expression becomes part of the expression tree, and it is fully like scrutable, whatever the opposite of inscrutable is.
Yeah. I have written an abstraction around it, but it kind of hurts because you have to take into account every data type and then every operator for, less than, greater than, starts with, ends with, like all of those things have to be, it's a great big switch statement, but it does work.
I didn't say it was going to be easy.
No, you can do it. I mean, you're basically decomposing and deconstructing a select statement and into its constituent parts, and then turning that into data.
But and of course we do various forms of it. I mean, if you think about it, something like Entity Framework is sort of that. It's just that the serialization format, if you will, is SQL.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, very good. So is there anything new for pattern matching coming in C# 12? Or do people not even know what's there in 11?
I think people are still discovering what's there in 11. There might be a little more in 12. We don't have that much planned in 12 for pattern matching, but I can talk about both briefly.
Yeah, I think that's one of those features that C# programmers are kind of like, huh?
Yeah.
That's kind of a head scratcher. When do I need that?
You need pattern matching when you have logic to select which way to go that is getting gnarly and hard to keep in your head. What pattern matching does, and in particular, switch statements and expressions with patterns do, is that they can give you a very neat list of that under these circumstances do this, under those circumstances do that. That is highly kind of like readable, straight line and readable. So patterns can, there are various kinds of patterns. There were only a few patterns when we introduced the overall feature in C# 7. And then it's one of those features that we've just been able to say, okay, what would be the next useful pattern to have? If you look at a language like F#, it has a bunch of different patterns. The sort of classic example of a pattern in a functional language actually is a list pattern, where you match a list. You can match an empty list in one case, and then you can match a list that has an element and some remaining, rest in another case, or various ways to match a list and then do different things depending on the shape of the list. Very much tailored to linked lists and that kind of classic functional approach to that. And so for a long time we've been mulling, is there like a non-linked list specific counterpart to that we could add to C#? And that's what became list patterns in C# 11. So we have a really good syntax now in patterns to say, you get something in, and you say, well, if the first element is this and the last element is that, grab the rest into this variable and then execute this branch. So it's just yet another way to decompose your input in a very succinct, readable way, and check its shape and decompose it at the same time, and use the bits that you drag out of it if you indeed match the shape of the thing.
I can imagine like a Boolean method is sorted.
Yeah.
Right. That would be a good thing to use list pattern matching on, rather than having to go iterate through everything and determine if it really is sorted.
It could possibly be. I'd have to think about how to do that. But yeah, it's quite possible that you could use that in the implementation. Certainly, if you're doing some sort of divide and conquer, I guess. I don't know. It depends. Yeah. And so for C# 12, we don't have big new plans. We're probably going to expand the reach of list patterns a little bit to more kinds of types, like two enumerables, for instance, aren't covered today. And a few other things, like allowing the same variable to be used in multiple disjoint parts of a pattern. So you can, it's just various kinds of little optimization. I don't think that's going to be a big thing in pattern matching in C#.
Any other great big wampin features that you want to lay on us for 12?
Well, there are some things that we would really like to do in 12. One is actually the feature that triggered us talking about backcompat again, is what we call field access in auto properties. So, an auto property is a very terse syntax that just generates a backing field for the property and a getter and a setter.
You're talking about, public string foo get set.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, immediately after we added that and we knew that full well, people will start to clamor for, well, can I just do this as well? And can I just do that as well? And that is sort of like, and we've added little things to auto properties over the years, but it sort of represents the fact that there's really a cliff where, and it still is, where if I want to do just one tiny little thing, then I have to expand this out to a full property implementation and a private backing field that I manually declare and so on. And we're like, can we smooth out that cliff more? So the idea here is that if you're writing a property and inside of an accessor, if an accessor is not implemented, then, okay, that means this is an auto property and there's a backing field and the accessor is automatically implemented for you. But you could also actually have an accessor implementation. One or both you could provide an implementation. And inside of that implementation, you can reference a generated backing field with the variable name field.
Oh boy.
So we're going to introduce the variable name.
I've created field variables all over my code. What are you doing to me?
Yeah. So that's why we need to, like if you were in certain, if your domain is particle physics or agriculture or whatever, field might be a common
football simulator. Yeah.
Oh, I guess. Yeah. That's another one. So that's a kind of feature that we really want to introduce it. There's no we could try to come up with a more obscure keyword instead of field, but who are we helping if we make it super obscure?
Right.
Yeah.
And this is exactly the feature that it would be so lovely for people to have. But there are a few places where you will just have to say this .field instead of field when you're inside of an accessor or property accessor.
Okay.
And that's, if you think about it, we already have value.
Yep.
In properties. Value is such a variable, right? And people just know that, okay, if I have a field called value, I can have a field called value. No. That's fine. Mm-hmm. But if I want to get at the field, I just say this .value instead of value because value is shadowed, right? It's no mystery. Right. And it won't be a mystery in the future either with field if we do it the right way. The only mystery is, how can I make sure that all the places where I don't say this .field today don't get broken in some kind of nasty.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's one that we're really eager to do. We wanted to do it last release, and then this particular issue came up that we were like, wait, we're about to do it the wrong way. Mm-hmm. Let's try to see if we can do it the right way.
And I suspected you only realize that fairly far down the path. It's like there's going to be a right and wrong way to do something.
Well, we knew all along, but because we have that kind of, our brains have been conditioned to work like that. So we knew very early on that, this is going to be a problem, but we were just reaching for a standard solution, quote unquote, which was, we'll just contort ourselves till it fits.
Right.
Story of my life.
Yeah.
All right, Mads. Man, it's been great. The hour's flown by, and that always makes for a good show. So thanks for coming back and keep us informed.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure as always.
All right. And we'll see you next time on .NET Rocks.
.NET Rocks is brought to you by Franklin's Net and produced by Plop Studios, a full-service audio, video, and post-production facility located physically in New London, Connecticut, and, of course, in the cloud. Online at pwop.com. Visit our website at dotnetrocks.com for RSS feeds, downloads, mobile apps, comments, and access to the full archives going back to show number 1, recorded in September 2002. And make sure you check out our sponsors. They keep us in business. Now go write some code. See you next time. Got transmitter banned by the FCC. Yes, I'm a